Well, as you know by now, of course, if you listen to this program, the federal district judge in Wilmington, Delaware, among other things, specifically asked the government, what ongoing investigation? You're giving him immunity, Hunter Biden, from everything for everything, despite the fact that he's only pleading to a tax case and a gun case. Then, of course, all hell broke loose on that and other matters. And then we've had legal analysts out there who've all hopped on this, and they've all said, I told you this would be the big issue. Actually, they didn't. This is one of the issues of many issues that we discussed here that he might be liable for. Big issue, small issue, or no issue. But I want to take it a step further. Here's Jonathan Turley, very smart guy. Real Clear Politics, scribing what he said to Julian Turner on Fox. During the course of this, she said, I think the crucial question, at least in a lot of people's minds, is whether what these unusual proceedings corroborate or at least substantiate the claims from critics over the last few weeks that this plea deal was a sweetheart deal, to begin with. Now, God knows we've talked about it here, we've talked about it on TV, we've talked about it everywhere. Jonathan Turley. I think it does support that view. The problem with a plea agreement is you can't actually type and wink and nod, right? I mean, the problem with this agreement is that the judge read it and said, what is this? And part of the obligation of the court is to make sure that the defendant and the government are very clear on what the agreement means. And they weren't. And it broke down with the most basic questions. That was, what was so surprising here is that these are the types of questions as a defense counsel you work out with prosecutors in advance. Let me stop here. These judges are not monks. They're watching the news. They're listening to radio. They know that there's a lot of questions about this deal that simply don't add up. You knew there were a lot of questions about this deal that don't add up. He says she basically asked one question and the whole darn thing fell apart. And so the question now is, where do you go from here? It's like a wedding where both the bride and the groom objected and everyone else is sitting there saying, wait, how did we get here and where do we go from here? Turner, I know, you don't know. Right, why? Just reading what it says. But why did they end up here? Why did they get to this point in this courtroom today where they didn't agree on what they actually agreed on? Turley, I think part of the problem is they really did want to cap out the cases. No, let me tell you why. And then I'll continue. I said it last night. Because the government's getting everything it wants from the district courts in Washington, D.C. Because almost every one of those judges come out of Main Justice. They know each other. They know the prosecutors. They know the assistant attorneys general. They know all these people. Plus, many of the cases are going before these radical Democrats appointed by Obama and Clinton to the court. And so my point to you last night, and I'll repeat it today, is the federal judges that are not in Washington, who are not from Main Justice, they're far more skeptical about the Department of Justice, Main Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the special counsel in the case of the Trump attacks. That's why. This judge never worked at Main Justice, and she's a judge in Wilmington, Delaware. Charlie, I think part of the problem is they really did want to cap out the case, which is true. The Department of Justice wanted to cap this investigation. But they didn't want to say that it was now over. And from the beginning, the Hunter Biden team said this is a closeout plea agreement. There would be nothing left to investigate. But the department is telling Congress, we're not going to give you these witnesses or these documents because there's an ongoing investigation. We talked about that. That didn't make any sense. He gets immunity from everything else, but at the same time, they're saying that the case is over. You can't do both things when a judge is asking you to specifically address whether this is a closeout or a continuing investigation. That's the truth. But I think in the Washington, D.C. courtrooms, They expected a rubber stamp, and they expected one from this judge. Because that's what they've been getting in all the Trump cases. That's what they've been getting in all the challenges. But it's not the D.C. courthouse. It's the Wilmington, Delaware courthouse. Or it's the Fort Pierce, Florida courthouse. Turley says, this is a big problem. This was all supposed to be scripted. True. It's all supposed to be easy. This is why to have, cholera, a judge with integrity, who's really going to look at the law, really going to try and look at what's taking place, makes all the difference in the world. All the difference in the world. That's the lesson from this. That we count on a judiciary that is truly filled with people of virtue. That's what we count on, to be a check on the prosecutors and a check on the Department of Justice. We haven't had that up till now. Turley goes on. And here we go. Because the judge just raised the one charge that the White House most fears, which is the chance that Hunter Biden was a foreign agent. If he was a foreign agent, the question is, foreign agent for who? And for what purpose? The president was that purpose. If you're influence peddling, it's influence over the president. So if you go for FARA, it's going to bring all this stuff in, including some of these tax accounts for 2014 and 2015 that the Department of Justice allowed the statute of limitations to expire. All of that can get bootstrapped into a FARA issue. The whole purpose of this deal is collapsing as we're watching it, and it's taken Washington by utter surprise. I was on the Hill talking with the members, and everyone was floored. Okay. Which is why the Department of Justice, when it goes back to this court, I think it's 30 days or 60 days, is going to do everything it can to work out another deal with Hunter Biden that may well include FARA. Okay, he violated FARA. Maybe he'll do a few months, or maybe he'll do a fine, or maybe we'll do something. But what's the real exposure here? The Department of Justice is not going to indict Joe Biden because it's long-standing department policy under Republican and Democrat attorneys general that you cannot indict a sitting president. You can't even force a sitting president to testify in a criminal trial. You can force a sitting president to testify in a civil trial if he's the subject of a civil lawsuit. The Supreme Court has settled on that. But you cannot force the president to testify in a criminal trial. Unless, of course, he's killed somebody on the street, in which case that raises even more complex issues. But we needn't go there because that's not what happened. Let me tell you what the big issue is here. Because this Department of Justice, under no circumstances, is going to be able to, even if it could, drag the President of the United States into a courtroom. Does it sound like Attorney General Garland's willing to do that? Have you seen any evidence of that whatsoever? He won't appoint a special counsel in this case in order to prevent the door from being thrown wide open. Joe Biden is a co-conspirator in the violation of FARA by his son. On multiple occasions, his son flew on a jet, Air Force Two, with him. And that was done to help facilitate his business transactions with foreign governments and front corporations. The multiple times it is said that Joe Biden was sitting with his son when he was making threats to officials and others in foreign lands for shakedowns. Joe Biden was helping to facilitate Hunter Biden's activities. Congress already has all this information. That is, these committees have done a hell of a job. They've already pulled the teeth. So they don't have to show that Joe Biden received a nickel, Mr. Producer. Not a nickel. We know that Hunter Biden received millions of nickels, tens of millions of dollars. They also have information from witnesses, like Bob Alinsky, among others. We're going to hear from Devin Archer on Monday. They also have schedule information on how often Joe Biden met with Hunter Biden's business partners and others. The case against Joe Biden as a co-conspirator assisting his son to violate the FARA is overwhelming. But Mark, you just said they're not going to charge him. That's correct. It should be the absolute first article in a list of articles of impeachment against Joe Biden because it is compelling. It is bulletproof. There is no speculation. You don't need evidence that Joe Biden took a nickel. He's a co-conspirator for his son, who took tens of millions. Now, by the way, if they investigate and find more, that's perfectly fine by me. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. But they have Joe Biden dead to rights for impeachment. Right now, as I speak. Dead to rights.